Started. It is 12 o'clock. I'm Kevin Toon, the LOC's communications director. I will continue to let people in as we go along. We switched to scheduling this as a webinar instead of a meeting, so I'm having to manually let people in. So let me just get through the preamble here quickly, and then we can get started on our main programming. I'm filling in for Patty Mohill, our executive director, who's at one of our regional meetings over in Sisters today. I want to welcome everybody to what we intend to be our final legislative update for 2025. As you know, a special legislative session was called by Governor Kotek on August 29th to address transportation funding for the next biennium. The House has voted on this package, and it awaits a Senate vote, which is now scheduled for September 29th. On this call today, we're going to provide you with the latest information we have related to the upcoming Senate vote and the components of the transportation funding bill, but we'll also be reviewing the outcomes and impacts of the 2025 session, the regular legislative session, specifically those that affect cities and those that are related to the LOC's current legislative priorities. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping issues, as we've always done. If you've not yet done so, please make sure your microphone is muted. As I've let you in, we've clicked the ability for you to participate, allowing you to talk, but please mute your microphones while our presenters are talking, and either raise your hand or put a question in the chat if we get to a question and answer portion. We are intending to end this webinar promptly at 1 o'clock. Also, if you can, please update your screen name to the city you represent. I will put some instructions on how to do that in the chat. Lots of new information to cover for you today, so we'll do our best to move through it quickly, and then we can take questions at the end of the presentations from our lobby team. So with that, let's begin. And to take us through the agenda today will be our intergovernmental relations team, our lobbyists, led by Legislative Director Jim McCauley.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I guess hopefully one last time for this year in terms of a legislative session download. As Kevin mentioned, on the front end of this, we're still waiting for a Senate floor vote on a transportation bill, House Bill 3991. I'll get to that a little bit later as part of my piece. But I think on the front end of this, it's worthwhile to note that we're in the middle of accepting applications for our policy committees. These are really important decision-making committees for us. This is really how the league frames its legislative priorities over a 2-year period. So we did this work a couple of years ago, came up with effectively what were a little over 20, maybe 22, I think, selections or options for membership to vote on. And then out of that, we came in to this 2025 session with 9 priority items. So going forward, your participation is incredibly helpful for determining really what is important to your city and what type of legislative work we need to be focused on for the next couple of years. So again, get your applications in for that. So we're going to work through this, pretty methodically, process-wise, and a couple of other pieces that I want to let you know about. One is we've got a federal disconnect issue that's causing a fair amount of revenue shortfalls in the state in the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. That is going to be taking a look at during the 26th session and determining whether or not Oregon needs to uncouple or do something different with how we match up with the federal system. The other final piece, just as a item up front here, is property tax study. House Bill 2331 is going to be kicking off after the short session. So once we get into March of 26, they'll be moving forward on some kind of a study that we were instrumental in being able to move through the process. So with all of that out of the top, we're going to start in on and just sequentially go through where our priorities are, how we did, and the bills that have a direct link to that work. So community infrastructure and housing development funding was a key priority. We've always had infrastructure as part of our top priorities going forward as an organization, and this time was no different. So I'm going to turn this over to Alexandra Ring and Michael Martin, who can lead you through at least 4 of the bills that were part of this.
Michael, do you want to kick off or do you want me to start us out?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off, Alexandra. Thank you. I had just hit join as a panelist as there, so I had a little gap. But yeah, Michael Martin. I manage the league's water, wastewater, natural resources, and solid waste portfolio. And as Jim said, we have always advocated for infrastructure. And this session, with all the challenges that we had around revenue and forecast, which will, I think, continue to be challenges going forward, there were some successes. So the first being Governor's Housing Bill, House Bill 3031, established a brand new infrastructure program, and Business Oregon is in the process of setting that up. And right now, there's $10 million in that as they kind of work through the details about how to set this up. And again, something that we've talked about on these webinars before, in recent years, housing and infrastructure have become linked as we have discussions in the legislature. So a lot of times, and Alexandra will kind of talk about this a little more, is like, how much is this infrastructure going to lead to like more housing? So we have a new housing infrastructure program, the governor's bill that we supported, and we want to continue to advocate for things that work for our members, for cities, and we'll continue to be part of those conversations. And right now there's $10 million in that. The second component of this is in recent years, we had $100 million in infrastructure direct allocation to cities. In a very tight, challenging budget year, this could have been swept away and used for other things. We saw that on, smaller bills, different bills throughout session, but effectively they reestablished and kept that 77 million for direct infrastructure projects. And last but not least of the 3 infrastructure bills, again, as Jim iterated, we have always advocated for infrastructure as one of our top priorities, and a tried and true program that has continued to work and show benefit is the Special Public Works Fund. We advocated for there to be more funding in that program for our members to use. The legislature ultimately chose to provide $20 million for the Special Public Works Fund. So that program provides low-cost financing to municipalities for design and construction of infrastructure projects. So that's sort of a top-level overview, and I'm sure at the end we'll have questions, but want to cover that and kick it to you, Alexandra.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you for covering the first half of this item. So next up is going to be your housing development items. One of the biggest barriers to housing development, as we know, being cities and city officials, is infrastructure funding, and the second barrier is kind of those gap funds to make things pencil. HB 5011 and HB 5505 are the governor's housing budget bills. These are the budget bills and the bond bill for Oregon Housing and Community Services budget. Together, they include $650 million in bond funding for housing development. So this includes rental housing development, homeownership development, and then $50 million in funding for permanent supportive housing. And then additionally, there's a $50 million set aside in lottery bonds for preservation of existing affordable housing. We're going to see a lot of affordable housing that, was maintained as permanently affordable for the last, 30, 60 years. Those contracts are coming up. They're going to need additional investments to continue to be affordable housing and to not become market rate housing. And that's really going to be that stopgap funding. This is by no means enough to meet our housing goals as a state. The governor has a goal of 36,000 units a year. We're currently at about 14. This will probably get us another, 1,000, 2,000 or so a year. So it's a step in the right direction, but certainly not as much as that we've seen in past biennium. And I'll go ahead and shift it back to Jim.
Okay, great. Thanks, both Alexandra and Michael. I think one of the things that Michael alluded to on the front end of this, pretty tough session in terms of funding availability. And even on some of those priority items that the legislature shares with us in terms of housing development and things of that nature, still didn't come in with numbers that we had certainly hoped for on the front end. But it's essentially the state of where the budget is at, and some of the difficult decision making that they had to deal with, because this was not the only item that was out there, obviously, that they were trying to fill buckets on. I think the important piece here to really hone in on is that housing infrastructure fund. We now have a program in place that we didn't have prior to this session, and it's going to continue to be an advocacy point to try to fill that bucket every year. So cities across the state can apply for some of those funds, similar to the process that was used this last time around, although this will be at least a more structured environment and something that Business Oregon is actually going to be running with. So I'm going to move to the comprehensive transportation package, which is still an ongoing conversation. So this was a priority of ours coming into the session. We effectively wanted to support a transportation bill that was comprehensive in nature, something that was putting investments not just back into the cities and counties through the state highway fund, but we had money or we had support for safe routes to schools. Every community that's had one of those projects in the past certainly sees the benefit of it. The other part is great streets. That's essentially the jurisdictional transfer. Those are two really big spending elements and stuff as part of a transportation package, and we're part of House Bill 2025. That was the primary bill going through the session. In addition to those elements, ODOT obviously had a lot of, I'll just say, accountability challenges. So there were a number of elements in that original transportation bill during session that really elevated the requirements of reporting and decision making well beyond literally any other state agency at this point in time. So fast forward really to the end of the session, we were never able to get enough support on the floor in either House or Senate to be able to advance that bill. There was just too much concern over it being too expensive, effectively. What I can offer is that transportation bill this last session was the first time ever where the vast majority of the funds being raised were going to be plugged back into essentially your own communities. You would have seen a doubling of your state highway fund allocation in roughly 6 to 7 years. That is something that has never happened before from the state. Typically, every transportation package, even the most recent one in 2017, 90% or more of that funding that was generated from gas tax and all those other sources has gone to pay for large projects. It hasn't filtered back into the local government side. So certainly disappointing, because I think it would have been a generational type of investment out there for local governments to be able to leverage their own dollars, but also catch up on some of the significant problems that are out there on the roads. So bottom line is that bill effectively crashed at the end of the session, and the governor stepped in and essentially led a conversation with legislators across the state, a lot of one-on-one conversations with individuals, and out of it, we have House Bill 3991. As Kevin mentioned on the top end, it passed the House here a few weeks ago, and due to some prolonged illness from a Democratic senator, we've been unable to schedule a floor session to move that bill through. I was hoping that with the the download today, we would be able to share that we've finished because it was scheduled for earlier or on Wednesday of this week. It's now been rescheduled for a floor session in the Senate on the 29th. We still believe that the votes are going to hold. The key element here is there needs to be 3/5 on this. And with all of the Democratic senators showing up, that would give them 18 votes in effectively 3/5 margin. So that's what we're focused on for the 29th. We hope that it's going to move through. The elements of that bill are pretty simple. It's obviously not anywhere near the scale of what was in the original bill during the session, but it still is a worthwhile piece of legislation to be supporting. It's about a 25 to 30% increase in your state highway fund allocation, essentially by fiscal year 2026, roughly. You're going to see an increase in the payroll tax out there. Currently, right now, it's essentially a buck a thousand of payroll. So if you make $50,000, you're paying $50 a year. Currently, it's going to go to $100 per thousand, or $2 per thousand. So that's going to help out with stabilizing some of the transit funds that are out there. It's also going to help with some of the other shuttle services and community shuttles that are out there across the state, many in rural parts of the state. The biggest problem with the bill right now is that payroll piece sunsets at the end of 2027. So moving into the 2027 session, there's going to be a significant conversation going forward to take a look at transportation funding in the long term. I have a sense that we're going to be looking at future transportation bills that are less significant in scale, but still important to the overall piece on how we try to fund transportation funding long term. So that's going to be a conversation, like I said, leading up to the 27th session. The other elements that are in that bill right now is EVs will be part of a road user charge starting in 2027. So they actually will be paying into the fund. Up until this point, EVs do not pay other than registration fees, which are effectively double what anybody else who would be driving a regular gas sedan or what have you. And it falls far short of what the typical gas driving vehicle would be contributing towards the overall transportation fund going forward. And there's about just shy of about 120,000 electric vehicles out there right now, and fully expect that margin to grow in the future. There are also all of those elements that are in the accountability package for ODOT in terms of reporting and decision making. And then the other pieces here that are really important as well are the elements related to how they're going to solve HCAS and the weight mile structure. So anybody who's out there who drives a heavy vehicle, they pay a proportionally higher amount because of their impact on the roads. And we've had a problem with how that formula is structured. So they're going to find a solution on it here over the next couple of years, and also modernize how heavy trucks are paying into the system in the future. And it could be something as simple as a diesel tax. So that's all going to be part of what's moving forward in this bill. Again, like I said, it's scheduled for the 29th of this month. Wishing the good senator better health and the ability to get to Salem for a vote on this, and hopefully we'll have that going forward. With that, I'm going to shift down to lodging tax flexibility. This is something that Jenna Jones would normally be covering, but Jenna is not available due to travel and being in another place, and couldn't quite duplicate her services. So I'm going to take over this piece and just let you know that we came really close. There were two bills, House Bill 3556, which would have added a third definition to the restricted 70% for tourism impacted services like public safety and community infrastructure. The bill died during the first deadline. However, we found another vehicle, House Bill 3962. This would have changed the local TLT split post 2003 to 40% for tourism promotion and tourism related facilities, and then 60% unrestricted. We got this bill through the House and came literally within a couple of days of being able to get it through the Senate. It basically got caught up at the end. And I'll just say end of session politics. We had the votes in the Senate, and this will certainly be a focus for bringing it back during the 26th session. But awful lot of work went into this, as a number of other pieces of our legislation, and couldn't thank everybody enough for the amount of support that members offered during this time frame. And it was incredibly important to be able to establish this. And the good news is, again, there's an awful lot of work that's going into planning for the 26th session to make sure that we can move that same bill through the process going forward. So stay tuned on how that ends up playing out here in the next coming months. Next up is Rec-Immunity. This would normally be a Scott Winkles program, but again, Scott's not available today. So Rec-Immunity has been something that has, I think, dogged cities for a number of years, with different adverse lawsuits affecting access to parks and recreational areas. And we're hoping that the adjustments in language that we made in Senate Bill 179 are going to give us a much more permanent protection, essentially, for that recreational access. So some of the key elements that were added into statute now include designating walking, running, and cycling as recreational activities.
February 20th,
So
1940.
that's going to be real important, I think, going forward. And again, an awful lot of work went into that, and appreciate everybody's help going through that process. Next up with our priorities here, again, this is a Scott Winkles piece. This is a civil commitment reform. This is House Bill 2005. This changes and clarifies the criteria for civil commitments, modifying the process for declaration of mental health treatment, and expands the civil commitment of extremely dangerous persons. So those are part of his portfolio, and again, really important pieces for part of what our membership had voted on. So I'm going to shift, keep going down the list for us. We now move to shelter funding and homeless response. So I'll get Alexandra back on to walk you through that piece.
You caught me just as I took a bite of my sandwich. Shelter funding and homelessness response. HB 3644. So many of you, I think, the last 5 or 6 years, kind of really kicking off strongly in 2020, 2021. The state has been putting a lot of funding into shelter and homelessness response, but they've all been one investments, no kind of common thread between them, common framework on terms of what gets funded, who administers the funding, how we're ensuring that the end results are kind of what Oregon wants and needs. Last summer, the governor and Representative Marsh put together a statewide shelter framework working group. LOC sat on that working group, the city of Portland, city of Eugene, city of Bend. I think I saw Amy on here from the city of Bend earlier. They were all massively helpful. And that created what turned into the statewide shelter funding framework. This kind of formalizes the regional coordination model and provides kind of a statewide and permanent framework for how we fund shelter and homeless response in Oregon. This biennium, it was funded with $204 million. It's a little shy of the 217 that the governor originally asked for, but when you're getting to that point, you're essentially looking at fully funded, probably just a calculation error in terms of budgeting. It's a huge amount of funding. It is still not enough for kind of every shelter in Oregon. This really only has enough funding for shelters that historically have been state funded. So shelters that have received funding from 2021 onward from the state. But there's still some additional opportunities for things like step shelters, think your vehicular safe parks, your pod villages, to receive funding for the first time. starting next biennium, going through 2030-ish, there will be $104 million per biennium set aside for shelter funding. That is way less than is needed in our system. But it is the first commitment that we've ever had to long-term shelter funding. Though it does also have a sunset date because the legislature has expressed that they don't want to be funding this long-term. It's going to be a fight to keep 104 million. I think looking at our budget picture, I think it's going to be a fight to keep that 204 million given our budget picture. But LOC will continue to be there, remains a top priority. All of the above.
Okay,
Thanks, Jill.
great. No, thank you very much. Again, this is one of those places that's highlighted by limited budget dollars. And if there was more money would have certainly been put in. So again, this is kind of a theme here, is that states definitely struggling with trying to figure out where they want to put money. And there's just flat out not enough to hit some of the margins that or hit some of the top end pieces that they would like in terms of success down the road. So next up is energy affordability and challenges from rising utility costs. So Greg Miller is the newest lobbyist to join the league, and bring Greg on here to introduce himself. For those of you unfamiliar, Nolan Plesha left the organization over the summer. He's working for, I think, Hunter Communications, and Greg's been with us here for about 2 or 3 weeks. So I'm not seeing Greg in the box, but hopefully, there he is.
Yeah, here. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you. So can you turn your video on?
There we go.
Fabulous. So Greg, why don't you introduce yourself and walk through House Bill 3179 and 3546.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Greg Miller, been around Oregon politics for about the last 20 years in a variety of different settings. Public contracting with Associated General Contractors. We worked on a lot of commercial construction issues, licensing, funding for public construction projects. And then at a lobby firm where, again, I did just a lot of different stuff with the building trades, agriculture issues, land use issues, general business, kind of working on the economy of the state. And then the last several years in the healthcare space, be it through federally qualified health centers, hospital systems, or even in insurance. That's where my most recent history has been. And then through all of that, dealing with kind of the regulatory side. We focus during the legislative session on moving bills, passing priorities. But then after the session ends, you got to turn your focus to the regulatory side and the administrative rule writing and the implementation of policies that have passed. So as Jim said, I'll be focusing on energy utilities, broadband telecommunications, and public contracting with the league. And today, just wanted to give you an update on 2 bills that passed this last session, largely with broad support. As I go through these, you can probably kind of guess who the opponents of the bills would have been. But House Bill 3179 was the first, considered the Fair Energy Act. This engages the PUC in a more significant role in how utility providers, specifically electric and gas, propose and have rate increases approved by the PUC. In determining if a proposal is going to go forward, the PUC has kind of a new lens that they'll look through, and that is based upon kind of fairness, justness of the rate based upon the consumers that will have to pay it. And they're looking at fair, just, and reasonable. The utility will also be evaluated from the PUC kind of on their return on investment. And if the PUC deems a rate increase not kind of sustainable for the ratepayers, they'll have the authority to kind of adjust that to make sure, again, it's fair or just. In the rate application process, utility providers will have to submit a report that really gets down to the economics of where ratepayers are at. They want a breakdown of single family versus multifamily users, average rates over the last 18 months, approximate range of bills that payers face, specifically in the winter months. They look at November 1st through March 31st as those winter months. And as a side note to that, this bill would now preclude providers from increasing rates during those winter months. So to give payers some kind of sustainability and prediction on what their rates will look like during the winter months when usage is pretty high. The other pieces of data relate to disconnects for non-payment, overdue balances, and the number of payers that are on assistance program, either through the state or through the utility. On the transparency side, this will require the utility providers to make publicly available a quote unquote visual representation of the cost categories. So think of generation, transmission, general service provided. So you can kind of see, maybe imagining like a pie graph scenario, what the kind of general costs are of providing those utilities to users. The other piece of this that will kind of maybe start to give people a little bit more predictability in what their rate looks like is the commission is now, or will be soon in the future, be writing rules related to a three-year rate cycle, essentially. Providers will be required to submit no less than a 3-year rate plan, no more than 7 years, which seems logical. You wouldn't want to get too far out over 7 years, just with the unpredictability of generation costs and whatnot. But the goal of that is to, again, give some predictability as to what rates look like for consumers in a 3-year to 7-year period. They'll be working on those rules again, and while those are being produced, utility providers in the electrical and gas world are precluded from proposing rate increases until at least 2027 or until 18 months after their last rate increase as it relates to the rules being promulgated. So there's a little bit of a stop in rate increases until the PUC can get some of these transparency and fairness provisions put into place. The second bill, House Bill 3546, dubbed the Power Act, really holds high energy users accountable for paying their energy needs. And high users are defined as entities that are able to use up to 20 megawatts or more of power, and then defined under the North American Industry Classification System, basically as data centers. The code is 518210. But again, in looking what that really is and where this really applies, it's really high use data centers that just have extraordinary electric needs. The essential part of this law is that those high users will be required to enter into a contract with the utility provider that essentially says kind of a pay to play issue. We're gonna pay for the enhanced or the increased electrical generation that it causes to power the facilities. And so the crux there is just getting those data centers, like I said in the beginning of this, kind of the fairness and not shifting costs or the high costs that it takes to power these centers, not putting those on the burden of those small users, residential users around them. So again, similar to the bill previous to this, there's a lot of rulemaking that needs to go into place that will define the contract terms, kind of how exactly that relationship will work. But that is coming forth, and we'll follow up when those rules are put into place. With both of these bills, there's reporting that will come back to the legislature, specifically on this final bill related to high-use data centers in the interim, which is like we're in now, prior to the September 1 interim committee days. the PUC will come back and report to the legislature how many of these contracts are put into place, and kind of what the usage looks like for the high use facilities.
Greg, thanks very much. And again, Greg is new here for the league. He's taking over Nolan's portfolio. The other piece that Greg's going to be taking on is public contracting. So that's always a element during every session. So happy to have Greg on board. Tremendous number of years of experience that he's had in the legislature, and you'll enjoy working with Greg here down the road. We have two other items to really update you on before we kind of open it up and start going through Q&A. So I'm going to turn this over to operator and training. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Happy to give you an update on one of our top 9 priorities. The top line is that this bill passed the House Policy Committee and made it to the Budget Committee, and that is where it died. This bill would have established an operator and training program through the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and would have provided $3.5 million in grants to the workforce development boards for training drinking water and wastewater operators. I think we all know about the various labor challenges that are out there. This is also one of those ones that is both a national problem as well as a state problem. And we know that we need qualified drinking water and wastewater operators. I think with sort of the common thread that we've heard about the budget and revenue challenges going forward, this one really met a wall with effectively the co-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee, no new programs. So as we look forward to how we make this program available, we wanted to create a lot of buy-in going out through the workforce development boards, get more people involved. I also want to thank the Water Caucus for putting this as part of one of their priorities this session. I think there's a lot of work to go, but I think everyone understands the problem that our members face, and we're going to continue to advocate for this. And I just want to thank everybody who showed up and wrote letters, testimony in support of this. Really helpful, despite it not passing this session, but we're going to continue to advocate for it. So thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And we're going to let Alexander come back on here and walk you through our effort on trying to clarify time, place, and manner for public camping. So go ahead.
So, clarifying time, place, and manner for public camping. I think it's been a huge challenge to address this one. I think there's a general acknowledgement among legislators and among cities that the language used in the original bill 3115, which passed in the 2021 session, is incredibly unclear. It uses the phrase objectively reasonable when talking about what restrictions a city or a county may impose, but really provides no further clarity. And that creates a huge kind of challenge when it comes to how a city administers this. We started going into this session talking to a lot of city attorneys, other interested parties into how to address that. Obviously, full repeal is not a super likely potential, so we decided to address it by adding some additional clarity in law. We are going to use SB 593 as the vehicle for that. That was a bill that Senator Meek dropped. Unfortunately, it never got a hearing. So the amendment is not available. If you'd like to see it, you can email me. I think it's a hugely challenging time to try to address time, place, manner in the state legislature, especially with a lot of the rhetoric on the national level regarding homelessness and how we should address that, and certain figures supporting the incarceration of all homeless people. It's deeply concerning, and it's definitely something that the homelessness advocates in our state feel keenly. And so I think even having a conversation about adding additional clarity to an existing law is really hard for them to be comfortable with. It's certainly something that we'll continue to watch and continue to have conversations about, but it's going to be a challenge.
Right. Thank you. And I think part of what is really important for everybody to understand and what we end up having to work through with our legislative process is you got to have patience in this effort. I mean, we made progress on a number of those top priorities moving through this session. We didn't win everything, but we had success at least moving the needle. And I think part of what I need to articulate to folks is that for many of these pieces, it's a continual effort of trying to build upon the success we've had, trying to make it more successful in a future session. And for those things that we got stopped on, we'll be bringing them back because we don't think the issue goes away. We may need to, again, look at this time, place, and manner in a different way. And there'll be conversations leading up to the 27th session over what that may look like. That's clearly not going to be something for the 26th session. It's short. You have to have a piece of legislation that everybody agrees to because you really don't have a margin for an error. You're going to get one committee hearing in a 26th session, and then it'll move. If there's a disruption, if there's not enough consensus around the committee, then the bill is effectively dead. So that's why some of those more significant issues will need to move into the 27th session as an example. So with that, as Kevin mentioned, take time to raise your hands and put your questions into Q&A, and we'll do our best to start addressing them. So Kevin, do you want to take over Q&A or you want me to walk through it?
Let's just continue on, and I believe with the format we're using with the webinar, folks can just raise their hand if they have questions they want to ask, or you might even be able to unmute yourself. And then let's see, there is a question. Let's see. Oh, somebody's saying that chat is actually disabled. Interesting. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, bear with us, folks. The powers that be advise that we switch to webinar because of the possibility of being bombed. So I'm kind of learning this format as we go. There was a question here that I'm seeing in the menu option called Q&A. And this is from Dana Henry saying, I think asking, do you know why they have rescheduled the vote twice?
Yeah.
Also, I hear great concern about the transportation bill increasing taxes, but not accountability for how it is spent. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so just a little bit when I was talking about it. So a couple of things. Yeah, there's concern about the taxes and the increase. I mean, again, infrastructure costs money. Transportation investments cost money. This is a 6-cent increase in your gas tax. Effectively, your average driver in the state, a little over 12,000 miles. It's about $24 a year increase. The payroll tax, again, for an income earner at $50,000 a year, instead of $50 into the payroll tax, it would be $100 into that payroll tax a year. So it will increase taxes. There's no questions. Those investments are critically important, not just for your local governments, which again are going to see a 25 to 30% increase in your state highway fund allocation that you can then plug back into your local streets. But the other part of this that is difficult to maybe explain a little bit, and this is really kind of the ODOT challenge. So every transportation package that has been passed in Oregon over the last 30 years, 90% or more of that new revenue that's been generated has gone to project funding, which means the operations and maintenance side of what ODOT does, and which is incredibly important, is not funded with some additional allocation. They basically have had to survive off of what's left. And they don't have that ability anymore because the scale of their O&M or their operations and maintenance has exceeded what they can basically try to feed off of in terms of table scraps, is effectively what the issue is. So The other part of the problem here is that when you are generating revenue to pay for transportation projects, you can bond that revenue to pay for a project. So every dollar of tax, as an example, could generate $10 worth of bonding projects. You can't do that for operations and maintenance. It's real money. So that means every dollar that's generated in revenue that you're going to put into O&M is a dollar. You can't inflate it through some kind of a bonding type of formula. So that is part of the crux of the difficulty that we've got in this state in terms of how we fund transportation. Now, the other part of this I think that's important for folks to understand is that Oregon is at the bottom end of the entire Western US in terms of how other states fund transportation. We are the cheapest place to register a car. We are the cheapest place to operate a vehicle. And the next closest literally is Idaho. And in Idaho, if you buy a car there, your fees are going to be over $2,000. And in Oregon, it doesn't even go past 500 depending on the type of value of the car. So that's the other part I think to kind of keep in mind in this. But ultimately, moving into the 27 session, we are going to have to rethink how transportation is funded in the future. Because I don't think we can continue to survive off of just a gas tax type of increase or reg fee and things of that nature. There needs to be another look at how we set up some long-term funding for transportation. So hopefully that can help answer the question. Again, I have my fingers crossed that we're going to get this vote in before the end of the year or before the end of the month. And we'll be able to move into a different mode of being able to get some money invested back into your communities.
All right, thanks, Jim. So I was responding to a couple things in the Q&A feature. So if folks that are on the call, or on the webinar, if you do want to utilize that to key in a question, you can do that. But also there is the raise your hand feature in the bottom, at least I'm seeing it on my screen in the menu along the bottom. So we have some time. There's about 12 minutes or so before we end at 1 o'clock. So certainly feel free to chime in with your questions. While we're waiting for those, Jim, I know you said you had some announcements. Some things you wanted to cover. Why don't we get to that?
I took care of those, I think, at the top end. So I can do it again, just to reemphasize, if you want to be part of this policy committee process, get your applications in. You can find the application links and stuff on our website and off of articles in the bulletin. And as I said on the front end of this, those policy committees are really what set the agenda for us as your lobby team. We don't develop this out of thin air. This is really a member-driven process, and it's really important to the overall steps that we take every couple of years as we're kind of recessing or assessing what's important to the league.
So the other thing we want to make folks aware of too is that the LOC has published its 2025 legislative bill summary that is available to you through today's LOC bulletin. It's in fact a lead story in the bulletin that went out about an hour ago. So that is our comprehensive kind of deep dive on the legislative session, bills that impact cities. It is organized by legislative priority bills as well as portfolios. Okay, I'm not seeing a ton of questions. Well, let's see. Let's go back to Q&A and see. Yeah, we did get a couple here. So let's see if I can. Okay, so City of Boardman is asking, we recently had a visit from our state representative. In the presentation, information was shared that the shortfall was around 3 million, yet the increase brings in 4 billion. Is that accurate? I think maybe it's the shortfall was 3 billion and the increase brings in 4 billion. Jim, can you address that?
Boy, I'm not quite sure, but here's maybe what I can share. So their revenue projections were short at the end of the session in terms of where they had expected it from the previous session, somewhere in the tune of, I want to say maybe around $600 million short. The other part of this story is the decoupling of, or excuse me, because we are coupled with the federal tax code, and also when you look at the impacts of the Trump administrations or the big beautiful bill, Oregon is looking at some fairly sizable deficits with funding that are going to come pretty close to around $2 to $3 billion over the next 3 to 4 years and stuff. So part of it's related to the big beautiful bill impacts in terms of loss of federal funding. Part of it's related to the change in tax code that during this current fiscal year, I want to say are in the neighborhood of around $800 or $900 million over the biennium. And that number is going to go down over the next couple of years. But yeah, we are definitely facing some budgetary problems, and we'll have to take a look in 26 to see if they've got any fine tuning that they want to make in terms of tax code or in terms of some of their spending choices.
Jim, there's a question that I'm just seeing now about wondering why EVs aren't taxed at the quote pump, i.e. fast chargers. Will EVs be rebated for road miles not traveled in the state?
Okay. So a couple of things. Good question. So what's in this piece of legislation right now is really just focused on a road user charge itself. So as an example, if you want to go with that fee, then you'll sign up to what's called Orgo, and you'll be on the system for paying into it. Typically, I think you can pick either a monthly or a quarterly type of payment structure in it. And if you don't want to be part of that, it's just a flat fee of $340. If you join Orgo, the only road user charge that you're going to be charged will be based on your mileage in the state of Oregon. So it has the ability to determine whether you're in Washington, or Idaho, California, or wherever else, and only charge you on that basis of your driving in the state of Oregon. As to the charger question, I do think that that is an area that they're going to have to expand some kind of a charging element, because that's going to help capture some of that out-of-state vehicles that travel through Oregon and take advantage of the EV charging network that's in place. I think that's actually a relatively easy thing to do, but they're going to need some legislation to do that. The actual EV road user charge is not going to take place until 2027. So there's some time to probably develop some administrative rules and to look at some of those policy choices to make sure that they can get those charging stations into the mix as well. Just want to make sure I have the full breadth of question here. Okay, I think that's it.
All right, Jim, thank you for that. Still time to take questions. We'll give it a little bit more, a few more minutes before we wrap her up. And while we're doing that, I'll just take the moment to put out a couple of other announcements. We've got today actually is the deadline for advanced registration for the LOC's 100th annual conference, which is happening October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in Portland. So still time before 5 o'clock today if you want to register. Otherwise, we'll have to be taking your registration on site if you are planning to attend. And as I mentioned previously, check out today's edition of the LOC Bulletin. It's in your email inbox. Our lead story is about the LOC's newly published bill summary for the 2025 session. Jim also has an article in there about the components of the transportation funding bill. And I think, Jim, not seeing any further questions, I think we're going to call it a webinar.
Okay.
So I want to thank everybody for attending and for the work you do in your respective communities each day. You can reach out to the LOC through individual emails to our lobbyists and to Jim. Those emails are available on our website if you have direct questions you want to ask about the activities of the session or any legislation that might be impacting your city. Have a nice weekend, everybody, and hopefully we will see you October 2nd at the LOC Annual Conference in Portland. So long.